Survivor's Luck, written and read by Malcolm Cowper. It was one of the worst ever disasters in the Bristol Channel. On the 25th of April 1947, the SS Sam Tampa was caught in a ferocious storm as she was battling her way through the mountainous seas to Newport. A hurricane-force gale drove her onto the rocks off Scare Point, Porthcawl, where she broke into 3 parts. All 39 crew members were drowned, as were the 8 men of the Mumbles lifeboat who came to their rescue. The story you're about to hear is based on the only 2 facts that I was able to obtain about Joseph Griffiths, one of the Sam Tampa crew members. 1, he had survived 3.5 years in a Japanese prison camp, and 2, he had only been married for 7 weeks. From these 2 facts, I have constructed a fictitious, but I think plausible story. I have called it Survivor's Luck. Joe Griffiths, from Middlesbrough, had always wanted to go to sea. At 14, he went to a merchant navy training school, and 2 years later, he joined his first ship as an assistant chef. But this was 1939, and when war broke out, the sea suddenly became a dangerous place, as enemy submarines lay in wait to sink defenceless merchant vessels in an attempt to starve the country into surrender. Many times he heard the dreaded explosions that announced a torpedo strike on another ship in the convoy. Yet, miraculously, his ship was always spared. Christmas 1940 saw him home on shore leave, and at a dance he met a girl called Ruth. They fell in love, but their courtship would involve long spells of separation and letter writing, punctuated by short, precious periods of leave. In December 1941, Japan entered the war with the attack on Pearl Harbor. Joe's ship was urgently required to carry munitions to Singapore. There was no time to form a convoy, so they had to travel alone and unprotected. They reached the Indian Ocean safely, but one morning, just as Joe was clearing away the breakfast dishes, the ship gave a sickening shudder as a torpedo slammed into the hull. The next thing he heard was, "Abandon ship!" Joe scrambled aboard a lifeboat with 18 other men. They had no idea how long they would be adrift. The sun was scorching, and they had very little water. But in less than 2 hours came the shout, "A ship on the horizon!" Eagerly they watched the vessel slowly growing larger, but their spirits plummeted when it was near enough for them to recognize its flag. Not the friendly Union Jack or Stars and Stripes, but the rising sun of Japan. They had survived the destruction of their ship and the loss of everything they owned. Now they faced imprisonment in the hands of the Japanese, and from what they had heard about their treatment of prisoners, they knew that a terrible fate awaited them. They were not wrong. They were taken aboard and packed into a tiny hold without food, water, or toilet facilities. When the ship reached Singapore after 2 days, they were finally released, starving and stinking from this hellhole, and blissfully gulped fresh air again. On the dockside, they lined up to receive a meagre bowl of rice each before being herded into cattle trucks for a 3-day journey to the jungle prison camp. Again, they received neither food nor water and had just a bucket to use as a toilet. When they arrived at the camp, they were surrounded by men so emaciated that they looked like walking skeletons. One of them regarded the newcomers through gaunt eyes and said, "Welcome to hell." It was hell indeed. For the next 3.5 years, Joe endured beatings, starvation, back-breaking work from dawn till dusk, and disease, malaria, beriberi, scabies, pellagra, leg ulcers, and malnutrition. His weight fell from 13 stone to 6. Many times he wanted to die. All that kept him going was his belief that Ruth would be waiting for him to come home if he could only survive. The dropping of the atomic bombs on Japan brought the war and Joe's ordeal to an end. In their isolation, they had no idea of this, and awoke one morning to find, to their astonishment, that the guards had disappeared. Bewildered, they wandered around the camp until suddenly the air was filled with the roar of aircraft, not Japanese, but British and American planes flying low overhead and dropping parcels and leaflets telling them that the war was over. The first two items that Joe picked up were a tube of toothpaste and a tin of jam. He mixed them together and had, in his words, the best meal of my life. But the leaflets warned them not to overeat. Too much food in their shrunken stomachs could kill them. Later that day, a convoy of lorries arrived to take them to an army camp where they would stay for the next few days while they were medically examined and given carefully measured amounts of food until they were ready to be taken to Singapore and put on board ships to take them home. During the voyage back to Britain, Joe regained some weight, but he still looked so pitifully thin when the ship docked at Southampton that Ruth, eagerly awaiting on the quayside, hardly recognised him. As they embraced for the first time in over 3 years, she could barely conceal her feeling of profound shock. Now that Ruth was once again a living person, not the girl whose memory had sustained him over those nightmare years, Joe burst into tears. After all the agony, the suffering, and the horror, his grief poured out in uncontrollable sobbing, and for many minutes he clung on to Ruth as if fearing that she would disappear again if he let go of her. His ordeal had left deep scars on his mind, and in his dreams he relived the horrors of his captivity. Patiently, Ruth endured his mood swings and irrational outbursts of temper. Slowly, very slowly, he started to recover and talked about going back to sea. One afternoon, as they were walking along the beach, he turned to her and said, "Ruth, I'd never have got through this without you. I can never thank you enough. Will you marry me?" If she was astonished by this unexpected proposal, she didn't show it. "Of course," came her unhesitating reply. "I'd like to go back, just for one trip, and see if I still love it. If not, I'll come ashore and get a job as a chef." Ruth secretly hoped that this would happen, but did not say so. It had to be his decision. They married on the 1st of March, 1947. 7 weeks later, Joe was instructed to join a ship that was to sail from Middlesbrough to Newport and take on a cargo of machine tools to Valparaiso. On the morning of the 22nd of April, Joe gave Ruth a final hug. "Stay safe, darling," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "Of course I'll be safe," he laughed. "I'm a survivor, aren't I?" As he turned to give a final wave, she shouted, "Joe, what's the name of your ship? I've forgotten." "The Sam Tampa,"